our founder, Joachim Stempfle. He is our founder, but none of us can pronounce his name, so we call him Joe. A little bit about the history of atrain Hong Kong. About 5 years ago now, I was sitting at my desk, an email came in, and this German guy, was asking for help to develop a test. And fast forward 5 years, we've opened an office in Hong Kong for atrain. We are also in the US and Brazil. And we do a number of services that Joachim or Joe will tell you about. So thanks very much for coming. I realize we're in the last session of the conference, so really appreciate you stopping by, and hopefully this will be useful for you. And we will introduce our team at the end as well. All right, Joachim?
Thank you so much for the invitation. Does anybody still have energy left here? I know it's pretty late in the day. I hope you're still awake. I hope you still have some energy left. I want to start not with actually the topic, but with a very short emotional story. I hope you excuse that. But my first time in Hong Kong was actually when we had just founded the company, and I was the founder of a company that had no revenues, a great vision, no money. So I had no money, but I had a lot of time, which allowed me to backpack, right? So I traveled the world, I traveled Asia, spent 5 days in Hong Kong, and I was extremely impressed with how well the city was organized, how well everything was running. But more importantly, the quality, the number of restaurants, the quality of the food. And I was impressed with how much people enjoy life. And I thought that's a great place to set up an office. So it's great that we actually were able to make it happen. And I'm very passionate about the topic that we're going to talk about, which is really future global megatrends, things that we will encounter in the future and how they impact HR. And it's a bit of a hard topic. And let me tell you why. Because I know all of you guys are probably extremely busy trying to help the business to cope with the day-to-day challenges. How we're going to ramp up the business for the next 6 months, how we're going to get enough people in, how we're going to get these people skilled up. It's very much operational. It's very day-to-day based on the growth, based on the dynamics that you experience. Now we're going to talk about things that are much more long-term and that are not immediately operational, and that will require you as HR to challenge the business to rethink even the fundamental business strategy on a very fundamental level, based on some things that happen in the world that the business may not be aware of. And that's hard, because you're going to have a lot of business people telling you, you know what, I've got other worries, right? So it's important to be armed, to know a lot of things and to know some of the facts. That's why some of the things we want to talk about are actually research-based, but then to think about some of the implications and where can you start. And we want to share some examples too. And hopefully, we have some people who are also open to join in a little bit, because we have some pieces where we would like to ask for your input. We have a lot of expertise in this room. This is just some very short points about atrain. I'm just not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but basically we focus on talent and leadership assessment and development, operating globally in all the continents in 8 languages. And what we focus on is long-term customer relationships. We only do long-term projects. You'll see more about that as we go. But this is not about us, this is really about the topic of global megatrends, and we want to cover these points. Global megatrends, what does that mean for HR and for business in general? What are key focus areas for action? A closer look at China, and then some of the key principles around leadership development, talent management, to incorporate these principles in. I want to start with a question. You guys, I'm sure, you're here, so you're thinking about this topic. You wouldn't be here if you were not interested in megatrends and what is happening out there. So I want to ask you guys, what are the megatrends that you see? What are the things that go through your mind when you think about megatrends that will impact the workplace? Let's see, where are the courageous HR people in this room, okay? Now, I'm known to be a pretty tough facilitator, so if I don't get any hands, I'm just going to point out people, okay? I hope that's okay for you guys. But global megatrends, who has any thoughts around this? Trends that will impact the workplace? Okay, it is late in the day. I can see that. Let me just ask some people here. What do you see as global megatrends? I'm sorry, you're wearing a red, so, wrong color. I'm sorry about that.
I should not have written.
What do you see?
Well, many different things actually, but the introduction of thank you. Just the whole introduction of technology, more advanced technologies that make employees work not only in an office but everywhere. So global mobility, and then also I think with the current economical crises that concurrently have going on, employers kind of have to have a flexibility with their workforce. So more and more we have contractors instead of permanent employers, so it's difficult to get commitment.
So two very important points: technology, the impact on technology that changes work schedules, freedom for employees to work from home, and then we have a more flexible workforce. Other ideas? Anybody else? Global megatrends.
The aging of the workforce worldwide.
Very, very important point. Aging of the workforce, which we see across different countries. Anybody else? What other megatrends do you see? I'm going to ask you, sir.
More and more multinational, cross the border, and also multiple tasking, so be trained.
Absolutely. Multinational business across borders. There are no borders anymore for businesses. Thank you, guys. I should actually enlist you guys to write a book with me about this topic, because we have, as I said, a lot of expertise in this room. We've done a lot of research. We've looked at megatrends, and we try to summarize them into the 5 biggest one in terms of impact on the workplace, on the workforce. And the first one directly goes to the point that you've mentioned up here in front. It's really the demographics, and if you look at basically the research, it shows clearly the more society advances economically, the more you see birth rates declining. It's almost like a law of nature. You can see it across the board, across different cultures. You can see that thing happening. It goes along with urbanization. It goes along with different lifestyles of people that just make it much more difficult to raise a large amount of children, which leads to aging populations, aging workforces. It leads to a severe talent shortage. If you think we have a war for talent now, you better be in for some big change in the next 10 years. I mean, think about all these people hitting retirement. Think about all these people we will need to replace. We're going to have a completely different dimension of a war for talent than what we have now, right? And then you look at 5 generations at work that bring completely different experiences, how they were brought up. And very interesting, for the first time in history, we see a massive shift of bargaining power when it comes to bargaining for work contracts from employers to employees. Guess what? You're not hiring employees anymore. Employees decide whether they want to join your company or not. That's the reality, right? That's the reality today, and that will be the reality in the future. And as a result of the global inequalities in terms of economic development, we will see new levels of mass migration. We see some of that already in Europe. For example, a lot of people emigrating from Spain to other European countries where there's a lot more labor, Switzerland, Germany, Northern European countries, and we'll see much more of that across the globe, but the direction will be reversed. If you think about the past, we had a lot of emigration from China, for example, to the US. In the future, it might be just the other way around, where people actually immigrate into China because that's the place to be. Now, the next trend is really knowledge economy, basically saying that the future is all about the ability of companies to generate knowledge and, as a result, innovation. Processes can be copied extremely quickly. Technology can be copied quickly. What cannot be copied is your company culture and the skill level, the combined collective skill level, competence level of your employees, right? So you can copy the iPhone, but can you copy the culture that created the iPhone? And can you copy that level of skills, that level of collective skills? If you take the designing skill, the engineering skill, the marketing skill, can you copy that combination? That's going to be really difficult. So it's all going to be about the ability to create knowledge and innovation, and as a result, it is all going to be about qualified workforce. So we're going to have the same trend across almost all the countries. We're going to have too many people that are unskilled, but not enough people that are skilled. And we're not just talking about leaders and managers, we are talking just as well about specialist talent, and educational systems are unable to actually fill the demand, right? Just in pure numbers. I'm not even talking about the quality of this talent yet. Now, globalization 2.0 or even 3.0 will look completely different even from what we see today. We will have a fully multipolar business world where you have multiple hubs of power, of economic power, that really are equally strong and that are all basically hosting multinational companies. So today we're still a little bit in a transitional phase where we have a lot of multinational companies hosted in the West. We do have some hosted in Asia. Take Samsung, take Lenovo, take others. But that's going to be a trend that we see much more increasing, where a lot of companies originally hosted in Asia will also compete for global markets. So growth will obviously be driven by emerging markets. It already is today. I think China already is one of the most important markets, if not the most important market for a lot of companies to focus on. So work will become global. We will be working across boundaries. And that means we need leaders who can lead globally. That's a real challenge, okay? Now you could still say, as a manager, I can choose to just work for a local company, then I don't need to have, a global scope, global experience. Well, how long will your company remain a local company, right? Maybe for another 10 years, and then that company will want to also tap into overseas market. A lot of companies will now become global, and in the past, you would have to be a big company and have lots of resources to operate globally. Today, you don't. You can build networks, you can work across boundaries, you can have an extremely small company and operate on a global scale. We're not a large company, we operate globally in 8 languages. And what you see is not so much countries competing, but actually cities or regions competing. So it's interesting that Shanghai now competes with New York. It's not China competing with the US. It's the cities, the regions competing. And you see economic hubs, like if you take Silicon Valley in the US, that's a hub of innovation that has a lot of universities, very innovative companies, the venture capitalists to go along with it. It's a system that works, right? It's an intact system for a certain type of business. And you'll see regions and cities competing that manage to build these kind of systems. And I don't have to tell you about the competition between Hong Kong and Singapore, right? That's the big one here. We're going to talk about that later over a beer, if you want. Okay, and then 2 more megatrends. We talked about technology here. Digitalization. Everything is digital, and the workplace of the future simply is the mobile phone or the iPad, right? You can work literally from anywhere. It does not matter where you are. And guess what? Generation Y employees don't accept anybody telling them that you have to be in the office just because you have to be in the office. Why? If I can do it from home, why should I not do it from home? So really, the workplace of the future is the mobile phone. Social media allows people to connect completely across borders. And also, a really interesting piece, you cannot control information anymore. You cannot control what people know, for example, about your company. If you don't believe me, go to glassdoor.com. It's a very interesting site. Employees just post information, what they think about your company, how they rate your CEO. Forget your engagement survey. Just go to glassdoor.com and get it for free, right? Your employees tell other people what they think about your company. You can't control that information. Employer branding is dead. It doesn't work anymore, right? People get their information from much more reliable sources, from people who work inside your company and to tell them what they really think. And finally, this is a big one too, the shift in values, and actually we've named it wrong because it sounds a little bit like the young generation, Generation Y, and millennials now want different things than past generation. It's actually not true. Human beings are human beings, and past generations always wanted the same things. The difference is the young generation can afford to demand these things. We're now in a bargaining position where the old thinking of, you just have to take what the company can offer, and if you don't like it, tough luck. That's not going to work anymore. So employees are looking not just for a paycheck, but they are looking for other things, and we're going to talk about those in more detail. And work-life flexibility is the key demand of a new generation. Why are we not saying work-life balance? Because that's an old-fashioned concept that basically assumes that there is an objective balance, and it's the same for everybody. Work-life flexibility means it depends on what I need. Okay, I have 3 small kids. So, and I have a job that is quite demanding. So my personal schedule is at home, I work until 6 o'clock. The 6 to 9 p.m. I'm definitely home. There's no meetings, then I have calls with San Francisco because my kids are in bed, right? I can work another 2 hours. Now that's my personal schedule because of my personal situation right now in life, and I'm able to run my schedule that way. Shouldn't everybody be able to somehow run their own schedule that way? And that's a demand that people have. If I have small kids or I'm taking care of my parents, my needs are different than if I'm completely free and independent and can just work whatever hour you want. And really the traditional incentives, money and status, lose motivating power for the new generation. People are still interested in it, obviously, and money, I'm sure, and the engagement surveys say is still important in Asia, but even if you look at some of the more recent engagement surveys, career opportunities, development opportunities become more important than even money, which is really interesting. Now, why do these megatrends matter? Because really the question is, now if we have these megatrends, are you ready? Is your company ready? And if you look at the different HR processes and how they impact the business, are they actually ready to deal with these changes? And the question of whether they're ready or not will determine whether you are sustainably successful, right? Because they will determine whether you're able to attract and retain employees, the engagement levels of your employees, the performance levels, and the levels of innovation in your company. These are a result of a lot of things that you do here, right? So you can't change the megatrends, but you can change the way you deal with them, or whether you even operate at all to deal with them. Now, let's have a deep dive in some of these areas. And the first one, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because I think a lot of this is already pretty much well known, is attraction and sourcing. Every company needs a clear talent acquisition strategy where you have clearly defined critical target groups. What are the critical target groups that you need to hire? What are the people that are most important for you to drive your business? And where do you find them, and how do you systematically attract and approach them? You have to be very clear and very strategic and very systematic. And it's really not anymore about buying talent, it's about building talent. It's about hiring people that might not have the experience, but have a lot of potential, and developing these people internally. And a lot of companies are not ready for that. They're still looking for these people with 5 years of experience, have done all this, have had international experience. Guess what? Everybody else is looking for these people. They're extremely expensive, and they probably don't stay in your company very long, right? Because they get the next headhunter calling. So the question is, are you committed to build talent, and are you hiring for potential versus performance? And then social recruiting obviously replaces traditional recruiting. It's really about sourcing candidates over social networks. A lot of companies moving away from using headhunters, building internal talent scouts that do the job, that create long-term relationships based on their talent pools. They know the people that they build relationships with, and actually they then directly get in touch when there is an opening because they already have that relationship with these people up front. Yes, a strong employer brand is vital, but the traditional ways of building a brand are dead, right? We talked about free information flow. It's not about the propaganda anymore. It is about what your people in your company say about your company. So every employee becomes a messenger and builds the brand. And finally, when we talk about all these changes in values and motivations, we need a completely different level of leadership. We need leaders who really care about people, who deeply care about employees, and who are able to show that in their behavior. It's a different aspiration level. We cannot accept people in leadership roles anymore who might be driving the business, but who at the same time drive away the people, right? You might have gotten away with that in the past. In the future, we will not be able to afford people who produce huge turnover rates because they just basically drive employees away. That leads us to the next topic of organizational culture and leadership. And really, what we're arguing here is that employee engagement, very simply, is the one and most important KPI of the future. Will top revenues, profits, cash flow, all the things we heard about yesterday. The number one piece that companies will be measuring their leaders on is employee engagement. Why am I saying that? Here's an interesting question to you guys. So if you take 3 things that managers are typically worried about, engagement is one, strategy is another one, processes and structures and governance are the third one. How much impact do you think they have on your long-term performance of your business? What percentage would you attribute to strategy? In percentage terms, what percent of your company success, your long-term company success, is determined by how good your strategy is? Any guesses? We'll start with 50. Anybody who thinks 50, raise your hand. 30. Anybody for 30? 20. Okay? 10. The actual number, research-based, is 3. 3% in research of your long-term company success is determined by differences in strategy. How much do you think is determined by process, structure, governance? 50? Anybody? 30? 20? 10? 5? The answer is 0. 0% of the variance in organizational performance, research-based, is governed by differences in processes. Why? Because once you're good in a process, people will copy it very quickly, right? It's not something you can sustain. How much of your success is determined by employee engagement? 50? 30? 20? Okay, now you guys have lost courage. I can see that. Sorry about that. Okay, actually, employee engagement, research-based, explains about 15 to 20% of organizational performance. Now, that might not look much, but if you think about how multi-causal this equation is, how many factors affect your performance, it is the single best long-term predictor for organizational performance by far. The single best long-term predictor for hard performance as measured by profitability, innovation, and so forth. And there's a lot of research to support that. Now, if you think logically, if you had the greatest strategy in the world, and you people don't care about your strategy in your company, the impact is 0, right? Because it's not going to be executed. If you had no strategy, but you have absolutely passionate, dedicated, engaged employees, they will figure it out, okay? They will kill any competitor simply because they're passionate. They will think about your company and what it needs to do to be successful day and night. So that's the logic behind it. Of course, it's good to have a good strategy and engaged employees, right? That's a good combination you want to have, and the right processes. But it is important that contrary to a lot of the things that we hear about revenues, profits, and balance sheets and all this stuff being extremely important, these are lagging indicators that give you a long delayed feedback on how engaged your employees are, how effective your company culture is, and things like that. So you should worry much more about people and about engagement and about culture and about customers than about profits and revenues. Actually, I lead business. I don't care about these things personally too much. I look at these numbers every once in a while, but that's not my concern. My concern is customers and my own people, right? And success will come. If you worry about revenues, then it's already too late. That's my personal take on it. So it's really about people. Now, what engages people? And here's basically a summary of a lot of research, based decades of psychological research in different areas that really looks at fundamental human needs, what drives human behavior, purpose. People want to do something that has meaning. They want to create an impact in the world. They want to contribute to something bigger than themselves, something that lasts. And they want to act in an ethical way. They don't want to do things that are wrong just to make somebody's balance sheet look better. I get employees in our company emailing me when we have a new customer approaching, is this company ethical? Do we want to do business with these guys? Do we as a company want to support these guys? My employees challenge me, do we even want to work with these people, right? It's important to them. Who are we? Who are we working with? What is our purpose? Why are we doing what we're doing? It's really, really important. Mastery, a key motive obviously also in China. The ability to learn and grow personally and professionally. Not just professionally, but also as a person. To do more things, to be able to do more things than you were able to do yesterday. So people want challenging, realistic tasks. They want things that challenge them to stretch. And they obviously really require ongoing and timely feedback. Generation Y employees will not accept not getting that kind of feedback. They crave for real feedback. Efficacy means that you're able to influence and to decide on your own destiny. You don't want to be basically governed by somebody else. You want to be able to run your own life. So that starts with the autonomy, being able to decide what you do when, where, and how you get your work done. So how much autonomy do you really have to basically structure your own life and also structure your work life? It's kind of funny that we have a lot of situations where people very much structure their private life, but they come to work, they work for a boss who feels that they're not intelligent enough to make the most basic decisions, right? I need to tell you exactly what your objectives are because I don't trust you that you can think about what your objectives should be yourself. That's a really old school assumption. So it's really about efficacy, it goes beyond that though, it goes towards participation and employees wanting to influence decisions, not just decisions that affect them, but actually the company, the direction of the company, what are we doing? So, robust discussions. Esteem, you want to be respected and recognized by people for what you do, for your contribution. It's interesting when you do, when you look at research, the number one thing, the simplest really motivator for people is simply saying, you've done a really good job here. A lot of managers have such a hard time doing that. Now, I'm German originally, and it's not part of the German culture to tell somebody that they've done a good job. There's even a German saying that says, if I don't say anything, that means you've done a good job. Okay, I'll tell you if you screw up, for sure. But I'm not going to tell you ever that you've done a great job. But that's just such a simple and easy thing to do that has such a big impact, and it's so important to people. Now, one of the most underrated human needs in business is the need for community, a need for good, deep relationships with people, and a need for a non-competitive, close environment. We've got enough competition to deal with on the outside. Now, if we start competing within our own team, and we implement performance management systems that start playing people against each other, that creates additional stress that nobody needs. In fact, that's one of the biggest stressors at the workplace. My wife's a psychotherapist. She gets lots of people in therapy who basically suffer from that, from a workplace that doesn't allow people to create deep and good relationships with others. It's a basic human need. We want to have good relationships with people, and we like to cooperate and not always to compete. And it's interesting that good, strong social relationships are a key ingredient for happiness, right? People want to be happy. They want to enjoy life. They want to have fun. And finally, there are obviously material and safety needs. They're very important until you reach a certain threshold. And again, there's very nice psychological research. So for example, in the US, researchers have put a quantitative figure to up to which level is it still motivating to make more money, and when does it not change your happiness level? And the figure in the US is $6,000 US. So if you make $4,000 US, it might still be interesting with the cost of living to make 1,000 more. It still adds a little bit to your happiness level. Once you make 6,000, it doesn't matter whether you make 7, 8, or 9, it doesn't make you any happier. It doesn't change the happiness equation, right? Why? Because we adapt. So yes, you buy a nicer car, the first 2 days that's interesting, then it becomes just a car. You just get used to it, you habituate. That's the psychological term, so it doesn't give you any thrills, it doesn't give you any pleasure anymore, right? So material needs are important up to a certain level, but once you reach that threshold, it doesn't really give you happiness. Now, the piece about material needs, though, it is important to really create fairness and predictability. So, things that we have to look at when we look at organizational culture and leadership, it's really about putting people first. It's balancing business with people and not just focusing on the business only. It's allowing people to thrive in different ways, so replacing our traditional career models with flexible career paths. And it is about building a culture of transparency that encourages decision-making and participating in decision-making. And then work arrangements, and we had very insightful comments here from the lady in red here. Sorry to cite you twice, but yes, the traditional work model basically was built on work dominates everything. There's no concern for goals outside of work. You have to basically subordinate all your other goals to work. There is no need for that anymore. We have technology, and also this is not in line with the values of the Generation Y. So it is going to be all about flexible work arrangements and individualized benefits packages that allow people to basically balance their personal with their professional needs. And guess what? If you're able to balance these two, how much energy then can you set free? If you don't have to worry about, do I now find somebody to pick up my kid from kindergarten because my boss is getting on my case that I have to stay in the office for 1 more hour, but I have to pick up my kid. I mean, think about the stress that creates. If you don't have to worry about that stuff, because you can just leave and pick your kid up and nobody will mind, think about how much energy that will set free, right? So this really is the idea, to replace the static models of the past with much more flexible models and also discourage extreme jobs. Extreme jobs are jobs that basically don't allow you to do anything else but work. very long working hours, excessive travel, and your schedule really dominated by outside factors. Now, the only way to discourage extreme jobs is for senior leadership the moral way. Now, I have to be very honest, this is one of my personal development areas, okay? So this is something I'm working on as well, and it is definitely a big one. Now, we talk a lot about well-being when it comes to Generation Y. Here's a very simple model that we created to really give you an idea of what we're talking about. It's not about massage chairs and all this stuff, right? This is the easy road. Put in material goods, fruit baskets, and we solve the well-being issue. It's not as easy as that. Well-being really is a result of the personal rewards that you get from work, minus the costs, right? Some of the stressors, and then there's resources and protective factors that will allow you to buffer some of the stressors, right? So this is really a more holistic model of well-being, and when you think about well-being, it's more about helping each individual and each team and each unit to think about how are we going to work on that equation. It's not about the simple, let's put in the massage chairs. That doesn't work. That's too simple. Now, a last point here I want to cover is employee development. And we talked about the buying talent strategy will completely stop working. It's all going to be about really building talent. So companies need to really start investing much more into building both managerial and specialist talent. And the problem with that is that it's long-term, right? We want solutions now. We want to reach our next 6-month goal. But to really build global leadership talent, you need 3 to 5 years of experience. You need to send people around, give them different experiences. That takes a long time. It's a long investment. It's a 3 to 5 year cycle until you get the return on invest. There is no shortcuts, right? You cannot develop a global leader in 6 months. It's impossible. There are no shortcuts. So either you commit to it or you don't. And if you don't, then you're really going to be dependent on the external labor market, which is going to become even tougher in the future. Now, the implication of that is the most important person to help an employee develop is not HR, it's their line manager, who gives feedback, who coaches, who provides stretch assignments, different experiences. So that means the role of the manager needs to be completely redefined. Managers are, first and foremost, coaches. It's interesting that research on coaching says that coaching is at the same time one of the most effective leadership styles, but at the same time the most underutilized. So it works really well, yet nobody does it. Why? Because it's a mind shift. It's a complete mind shift. I cannot be the boss anymore. I cannot define myself by knowing it all and by being the smartest person in the room. But my role is a backseat role. I'm empowering other people to be successful. And that's a big change for a lot of people mentally to go through. So that's the piece. And these some of the points, again, summarized really here, about strategic talent management, developing both managerial and specialist talent, investing in managers as people developers, and it is going to be more and more about strategic partnerships with educational institutions, with consulting companies or other agencies that partner with you more on the long term, to really look at your long-term talent management needs and what do you need to do. Now let's have a quick look at China. We looked at some of these things, and really this is the region, the APAC region is too big to generalize across all the countries. The diversity levels within Asia are probably equally high than in Europe. So we just basically took a look together with our colleagues from our Hong Kong office. How do we prioritize these issues for China? Obviously, engagement and retention is absolutely key, and it starts with leadership. It starts with good people leaders. So these two go together. If you have a bad manager and somebody else offers you $50 more, why would you stay, right? The manager doesn't connect you to the vision of the company. There's no care for you individually for your needs. There's no coaching, no feedback. Why the hell would you stay, right? There's no reason. Now, if you have a great manager who really is interested, who cares, who shows empathy in you as a person, are you going to leave for $50? Absolutely not. If you have a clear career path, a clear career perspective. So I get that people always talk about it's the salary. People leave because of the money. Bullshit, right? I mean, other companies only can pay limited amounts. It is about good leadership at the end of the day. It is about really changing the idea of leadership and really focusing on people. Now, we're going to have a severe talent shortage in China, obviously, because that's the market that everybody is looking for. And also the whole topic of well-being will really come up. Now, one thing that I can tell you, I can imagine being really difficult in China specifically. We have all these kids now coming basically to age where they join businesses that were all raised in one-child families. Now, I'm sorry for my direct word, but a lot of these people will be spoiled brats, right? They're used to their parents, they're the center of attention of their parents, they think they're the center of the universe, some of these, right? So that's their experience, and now they're entering into businesses or organizations that challenge them to deliver performance, right? That's a big shift. I mean, from a managerial perspective, to lead people that have been brought up that way and to socialize them into a company that is much more demanding is going to be a key issue. It's really challenging. It's more challenging probably than in other countries. So we need even stronger leaders in China than we need elsewhere. Now, how to deal with all this? Now, I dumped a lot of stuff on you, okay? I'm sorry about that. It is complex, and we don't want to simplify things to a level where they just become trivial. So we want to make sure we cover the holistic picture. How to deal with this? Now, you're not going to attack all of these issues at once, right? But you're going to look at what is my company's strategy and objectives. And then you look at these megatrends, and you look at which ones of these will have the biggest impact on us. Where do we see the biggest risks or the biggest opportunities? And that's where you would define longer-term strategic HR objectives. And longer-term is not 6 months, and it's not 1 year. That's 3 to 5 years. Okay? Very few HR groups have agendas that span 3 to 5 years, but you need to. And then you start initiating programs, activities, metrics, you execute, and obviously there is the constant feedback loop. But the biggest piece we haven't even covered yet is this one, right? This is easy. This is really easy, trust me. The big piece is this part. How do you get people engaged? How do you get managers engaged? How do you get managers to understand the challenge and to rise to the occasion and to start changing things, to start changing the way they think about people, what's important to them? That's a big piece, right? And just want to show you a couple of very simple ways to look at this in a more holistic manner. It is not about doing one thing in an isolated manner. But if we look at, for example, leadership, if you want to be strong in leadership, you have to look at the entire equation. It starts from how do we define leadership as a company, how do we select leaders, how do we develop them, how do we identify leadership talent, how do we give feedback to managers, right? What do we measure them on? And does senior leadership model the way? And only if you put all these places, all these things in place, will you really have a change in leadership culture. Just doing one thing, just a training program is not going to do the trick. You got to think bigger than that. So it's about building entire programs and systems. And this model, unfortunately, doesn't really show well, but I just want to verbally explain it to you. It's about leadership development. We focus too much on competencies and skills, right? We assume that we just give managers skills and they're going to execute. Much more important is focusing on the why. Why the hell should I be a coach, right? I'm a manager. Why should I all of a sudden start coaching people? What's the benefit? So you've got to start working on assumptions and mindsets, then having people with the what, and then you focus on the how and the competencies, but not only working on the competency part. And here's an example of a program that integrates a lot of things. In this program, that might look a little bit scary. Focuses only on coaching. We talked about coaching a lot, being one of the key competencies for the future. And mind you, this is a 1 to 2 year program only on one skill, okay? And it only has actually 1 4-day training module and 2 workshops that are 1 or 2 days. That's all in terms of training, but it has a lot of execution implementation, it has a lot of feedback, it has managerial commitment, it has a coaching hotline, a toolkit, all kinds of surrounding factors. The actual training component is extremely minimal, but we have a very strong accountability execution component. 6 months of implementation with ongoing feedback and coaching. That's the key. It's not about theoretically learning what coaching is, it's about are you actually doing it. And mind you, how do we call this thing? We don't call it coaching training, we actually call it boot camp, right? Why do we call it boot camp? Because we basically tell people, you come there, we're going to drill you on coaching skills. We're not going to philosophize. We're not going to lecture you. We're going to have 10 flip charts, that's it. Very simple models, and it's about doing it. You're going to have to practice coaching 4 days straight until you basically coach in your sleep, right? That's how you learn coaching. You don't learn it by having somebody tell you abstract theoretical models about what coaching is. Quick look at talent management. What does strategic talent management look like? It starts with where is the business going to be in 5 years, and then what kind of people will we need? What are our key positions, and what kind of people will we need to take these over? And then how do we find and develop these people, right? That's the strategic view. easier said than done. How does it actually work? It starts with individual potential. You cannot develop anybody into a global leader. You have to find the right people. So there are some pieces here around potential. Then the biggest piece in the equation is people only develop through experience, and they develop through stretchy experiences, challenging, difficult tasks, where they take real responsibility for real people and for real businesses. And the more diverse the experiences are, the better for the learning, right? So there's talent management literature that talks about different business settings being different schools for leaders. So there's a change management school. When you have to actually drive a change in the company, you learn how to drive a change. There's a school building up a new business, a startup. That's a completely different environment, right? There's a school managing a unit after a downsizing and creating engagement out of a completely disengaged units. That's all different experiences that you can gain. More of the same doesn't give you more skill. It's about doing different things that will then help you to manage in different ways. Now, this only works with feedback, right? Experience without feedback doesn't lead to competence. It's interesting, there's a lot of research on decision making. I love research, I'm a psychologist. And decision making is a really interesting topic. So the worst decision makers, where do you find the worst decision makers? Any guesses? I'm going to tell you, psychoanalysts, right? And psychiatrists are the worst decision makers. Why? And that's objectively because if you just look at the reliability of their diagnosis, it's extremely poor. You send somebody to 2 different psychiatrists, you get 2 different diagnoses typically, right? And they don't hold up. Why are they such poor decision makers? Because a lot of times they only do the diagnosis, they don't follow up. They don't do the treatment, and they don't see how the patient develops. They never get any feedback. They make a lot of decisions, they get 0 feedback. Where do you find the best decision makers? Pilots, firefighting captains. Why? Because they get tons of feedback. They have to do simulator training all the time, right? They always see the impact of their decisions right away. That shapes their decision making. So you need feedback, and you need coaching and mentoring. You need people who help you get through difficult times. All this will only work if you permit for a level of error, right? So if you want perfection, you put people in stretch assignments, but you don't let them make a mistake, then you just burn people. You burn talent. There's the interesting, story about Henry Ford, who one of his managers had launched a $20 million marketing campaign that completely failed, right? And everybody said, well, are you going to fire this person? He said, heck no, I just invested $20 million in his development, right? So that's the idea, right? That you have to admit a level of mistakes, otherwise people can't learn, and that allows you to really build your talent. So your programs are not about training. They are about this, and this, and this, right? That's what your program should be about. And I'm going to skip this slide, but here's an example of a program that we worked out with a client. It's a 3-year program to develop global, in this case, finance leaders. It's a large company. We focused on the finance function, and this is about developing global finance leaders. Now, the biggest part of this program is over 3 years, they have to take 3 different jobs in 3 different countries. They have to apply for every single job through a normal application process. They can be rejected. And they're leading through a whole performance management cycle. So they're not just observers, but they have to actually do the job, right? They will get real feedback on how well they did. Yes, we do have some modules here around training, around assessment centers, development centers to give people feedback. There's coaching and mentoring, but the key piece is this, right? So these are just examples of how you can build some of these programs that are more sustainable, more long-term, take into account some of the challenges that we're talking about. In a nutshell, just to summarize, we have the global megatrends that we talked about. What needs to change? It covers all the areas of HR, attraction and sourcing, culture, leadership, work arrangements, benefits, employee development. All these areas basically need to change eventually. And it also affects everybody, line managers, HR, employees. And this will ultimately drive the long-term outcomes of your company. So, thank you very much. I hope this wasn't too much of a dump. I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot of materials. My colleagues tried to prevent me from putting in so many slides. They failed, unfortunately. I'm a little bit feedback resistant. But for those of you, sorry about that, Grace.
I really tried hard.
She tried hard, but you know how it is sometimes. But for those of you who still have a little bit of time to stick around, we very much would like some questions, some discussion with you guys. I'm sure you disagree with some of the points, so please challenge us as well. And for those of you who have to leave, we're not going to be offended, okay? So, Questions, discussions from those who still have a little bit more time? Do we have a microphone?
Yes. Actually, yeah. And I know that some of you now probably have to go. It's about 6 o'clock. You need to get to that packed MTR. Before you go, we just want to mention that we do have a public workshop on the 18th of January, Friday, and this is about going from talent development to organizational development. Very briefly, we found that a lot of the talent development interventions that we've done really become organizational development interventions, and I think that's a sign of excellence in terms of developing talent. So, just want to mention that, and thanks very much for coming. Again, if you want to stay on, we have more time. We're happy to entertain questions.
Thanks. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm Stephen Chen. Thank you very much, Dr. Stempfle. Regarding your question, that is your survey, that is the research basis. I'm quite interested because from my study, actually from the GmbH or whatever, that the strategy is much more actually important in my concept from the underlying mentality. It's much more than important because only you have the strategy, you define your people engagement or whatever. Do you still believe that is the research result? Thank you.
Now, this is just, really, let me just show this. Here's basically the literature. This is just research that empirically looks at, how was the quality of the strategy and how was empirically the development of the company in terms of organizational value over time, right? And you have a lot of companies. If you look, just take the example of take the Harvard Business Reviews, the best companies rated. Typically, you find the companies that were listed 10 years ago as state-of-the-art in terms of strategy are now basically dying. I mean, take the Nokias, take all these great companies where you have a lot of publications, you have a lot of business cases on, basically showing them as practices. A lot of them are not successful anymore. So, to your point, you need strategy to build engagement levels, but culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? That's one of the management gurus who said that. And that's a reality, right? Strategy is still very short-term, and in today's kind of volatile world, how long does it even hold up? How long can you even sustain it? So culture, from our experience and from the literature, is much more important than strategy. It determines strategy in a way, right? But that's the more lasting bit of the company. So,
How to
what's that?
how we can leverage on it then? Because it is totally uncontrollable factors, right? Whether it's cultural or whatever, but we have to drive the company according to use the HR or whatever.
But that's a great question, and I think it really points to a different role of senior leaders who are most importantly, from my perspective, stewards of the culture. That's their most important role. It's not to make decisions. It's building and communicating and protecting the culture. Everything they do is a symbol. How they spend their time, who they talk to, who they promote, who they hire, that's what people look for, right? They don't care when you say, we're developing internal talent, but your internal fill rate is 40%. People see through that, right? They look at your actions. So when we work with senior leaders, and when we coach senior leaders, one of the biggest challenges is exactly that mind shift to say, actually, it's not about any of your decisions anymore. That doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. It's about, have you built the right culture that will allow the people below you to build the right strategies and to drive these strategies with a long-term focus. That's the key. So it's a completely different role of senior leadership. Other questions or discussions? Challenges?
You talk about the stakeholders, the change management, which nowadays is quite a common hot topic today. But how are you going to drive that to make these top or senior stakeholders be aware of the change management? Can you explore or maybe elaborate a